The question is, please describe the age of accountability in terms of original sin. So, would you like to say a little more about what I said? Because I don't remember what I said last week.
I only remember that you mentioned the age of accountability. Probably the question was about.
Were we talking about confirmation? Maybe.
No.
No, not last week. Okay. So, the age of accountability is a concept that it's variable across time and culture, right? But the idea is that children are not responsible for their own actions, right? Their parents are responsible for their actions up to a certain age. And in some cultures, that age has been 12 or 13, right? In some cultures, that age has been 18 or 21. In our culture today, it seems like that age is about 45, right?
Although state of Texas, it's 10.
What's that?
Legally in the state of Texas, it's 10.
Okay.
If a child commits a crime under the age of 10, they're not charged.
They're not charged, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, even under 18, there's still sort of, are they accountable for this or not? Kind of question there, right? So that's the idea of the age of accountability is, when do we expect a child to be old enough? When is a child old enough that we expect him to take responsibility for his own decisions? Okay. To be responsible for his own actions and his own decisions, right? So, So the question then is, how does that relate to original sin?
That's part of my question.
Okay.
There are more questions.
There are more questions built into that? Okay. So original sin is a different kind of concept, right? So original sin is the idea that we inherit our sinfulness from Adam, right? From all the way back. Now, different people kind of have different ways of thinking about that, some of which are probably more helpful than others. The way I think about it is, certainly you're not culpable for actions, right? Up to us, before you can even speak, probably, right? But at some point in there, it's actually recognizable that you are a sinner, right? I mean, what's the first word we learn? No. All of us, right? No is the first word. And, at one level, I was just talking to my girls about this the other day, and at some level, that really is just an assertion of our own autonomy, right? Which at some level is okay, right? It's not sinful.
It's a combination of assertion of their own autonomy, plus what they hear a whole lot of.
Right. No. And so they learn to say no, right? But at some point, that no is wielded in the cause of disobedience, right? Of open rebellion.
But they're also, I'm sure with your daughters, they're showing that they're thinking about things that you said.
Well, yeah, and we were talking about. I think what it came up is we were talking about. We were teasing Lucy about when she was little. So Lucy was a very strong-willed child, for which she has taken full responsibility now. But there was this one memory that I have. We had these floor-to-ceiling bookcases, right? And when you have little guys, you have to kind of decide where you're gonna, baby-proof the house and where you're gonna just have to win this battle, right? I mean, there's some sort of, line there. And you gotta kind of find where it is. Well, we had decided that we weren't gonna try and keep her away from the bookshelves, or we were gonna try and close off the bookshelves from her. And so we had to win that battle. We had to teach her not to just pull the books off the shelf, right? And so the way we did that was I slapped her hand when she would pull the book off, right? Well, I kept doing that and doing that and doing that until I felt really bad, but I knew I had to win that battle, right? No, I mean, it wasn't abusive, but still, it was like, oh man, like, oh. And so finally, there was one day when she kind of went up to the bookshelf and looked at the books, and started crying. I knew I had won the battle. Thank you, Lord. So anyway, we were teasing her about that, but that's the sort of, we need to be taught to obey, right? Because we are naturally disobedient. That's original sin, okay? Well, right, and we need to be taught so that when there are rules that are for our good, we keep them, right? But also because, one of the things that is for our good is simply to obey. Not mindlessly, of course, but, right? We all have someone we have to obey, and, that's partly because that's just the way things work, right? Ultimately, even the Pope has to obey God. Right? So,
There's too much in reaction to respect for the law and respect for teachers and what they say to do.
Well, I'm not sure there's too much of that. Oh, you're saying it's the opposite problem. Right, that they don't have any respect for, yes, and I agree with that. I think that we have, Malcolm likes to talk about how the pendulum swings culturally, and I agree. I think we have swung way out to the end of, teaching everyone that the most important thing is them, right? And how they feel and what they think. And, I mean, I think that's important. But I don't think it's the most important thing, right? And when you tell people that for long enough, you get a society where there isn't a lot of respect for other people's feelings and thoughts and needs, right? So, and that's a problem. Anyway, but that's the idea of original sin, is that there is no way that we, as heirs of Adam, right, are going to escape that tendency to sin. The technical term for that is concupiscence, right? And that's that part in us that is gonna get us to sin, right, from the very beginning, even if we're not culpable for what we do up to a certain point. Okay? And I think culpability begins earlier than the age of accountability. Like, the age of accountability is when we expect people to be able to make legal decisions for themselves, right? And binding decisions for themselves. Like, you wouldn't expect someone to choose whom to marry,
So that
Right.
10-year-old, for example, in the state of Texas, that's
Right.
more of a culpability age.
Right, exactly. That 10 years old point is, well, yeah, you are actually responsible for what you did now, kiddo.
Yeah.
Right? Even though your parents may also be responsible to a point. Right? But at the age of 18, we get to vote. And we get to choose who to marry for life. At least that's what it's supposed to be, right? In theory. So those sorts of things. So I think around the age of, 1.5, probably you can say, oh, yep, my little ball of sin, how cute, right? But I think that's a helpful way to think of things.
I made the same comment when John Michael was little. I said, I love this kid to death, but when people talk about the innocence of children, what they're saying is they don't hide or attempt to cover any of it.
Right.
I see anger, I see sloth,
Yes.
I see gluttony.
Right.
See,
all of it. It's all in there, right?
And there's one little package
that's right.
that I love with all my heart.
And the only innocence there is the innocence of not trying to hide it, right?
Exactly.
Of not even realizing that you should hide it. Right? And that's what we were talking with the girls about when I brought up the story about Lucy, is we were talking about that the difference between 2 and 3, the age of 2 and 3, right? Everybody says, oh, the terrible 2s. They hit 2 and they become terrible.
That's a terrible thing to say.
I agree. But even if you want to, say, well, at some age they get harder to manage, right? Well, it's not 2, it's 3, because at 2 they've just learned to say no.
I disagree as a Montessori director.
Oh well, okay. We'll hammer this out later, but I think at 2 they can just say no, but you can still make them, right?
Yeah.
At 3, generally, we have learned to lie.
Lying is a sign of development.
I agree.
It means you're able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and think about what they're experiencing.
Well,
I agree.
Actually, there are 2 types of lying.
Right.
The first one is avoiding trouble.
Right.
That comes fairly early.
Right.
No, that's a beautiful blouse, Allison. That actually is a later stage. But no, that's actually a later stage of development. And interestingly, autistic children never reach that capability.
Right. Although they...
The first time Julian lies to me, I'm going to be like, yes, his brain's developed.
His brain's
I
developed.
was a little bit worried about John Michael for a very long time.
Because he wasn't.
And then one day he just flat out told the most bald-faced lie.
Okay. All right. Great. So I'm not saying that that's a sign that's a bad sign. What I'm saying is we all get there, and about that age, and that is a very clear sign that we are sinners, right? And that's where it gets really hard for parents because, okay, who took the cookie? Joey did, right? And,
Well, that's what parents of one kid have it easy.
Right. Yeah, that's why one is easy. Yeah. Yeah, as long as you can trust your spouse, one is easy. Yes, sure.
We lived in South Africa.
Uh-huh.
We had these American friends. When you're in another country, you say you're American friends. And they had 6 children. And my husband was really wonderful with children. Just knew how to.
Yeah.
So anyway, he had these M&Ms, little Smarties, and he said, well, anybody over 5 years old can have some of these. So how old are you? And she said, I'm 12. And how old are you? I'm 10. And he gives the book.
Uh-huh.
How old are you? And so all the children, and he came to Peter and he said, how old are you? Because he was 4.
He was 4.
I'm 5.
Right. Right. And we all recognize that. The reason we laugh and think it's cute is because we all recognize ourselves in that, right? And kids, but it's sinful, right? I mean, we can recognize it as wrong. And that's why we have to teach our children that it is wrong and not to do it, right? But that doesn't mean we're going to now let them decide who to marry. Make sense? So you said there were follow-up questions to this. So I think I'm done. So go ahead and follow it up.
Come back.
Okay. This is, by the way, this is why I do not push to confirm children at the age of 12 or 13. If their parents insist, we will. But when I want to ask the child whether he's going to be confirmed or not is later. And I figure you probably shouldn't ask that question until about 17 or so. I mean, that's that. If that or
that sounds like in the Amish faith, children at a certain age, and then when they become teenagers, then they go through a stage where
Rumspringa.
Yeah.
I can't pronounce the word.
Yeah, Rumspringa. That's how you pronounce it.
And then they make a choice.
They have to make a choice whether to go back to the community or whether to strike out on their own.
You can go
That's right.
Join the church.
That's right. So, I mean, I have met 15-year-olds who were ready to make that commitment, but not very many of them, right? I will tell you in my own life, about the age of 13 is when I just hit the point of saying, wait a minute, I don't know what I believe, right? I've been going to church with my parents. That's what they believe. I don't know, right? So I don't want to, so some parents are tempted to try and get their kids confirmed before that happens, right? We got to get them confirmed before they can think for themselves. Well, what that happens is just gets them forsworn, right? I mean, they take oaths that they're not ready to take, and then they break them, often. So I don't want to do that to kid. And so that's why, and in every confirmation class I have ever taught, particularly to kids, I have told them, okay, this is a lifetime commitment to Jesus. Don't do this if you're not ready to make that commitment. And if your parents are upset with you, I will go talk to them, right? Because I will respect you for waiting if you're not ready to make that commitment. I think that's a good thing. What that means is that when kids get to that point and they're not sure and they go off and they're not believers, then at least they know they're not believers. Yeah. Right? And later, if they come to faith, they can come back and be confirmed. And it's meaningful. So, I had a couple parishioners in Philadelphia who had grown up Anglicans and had been baptized as children, and then actually not raised as Christians, and they later on in college came to faith, and it was a sorrow to them that they had not experienced their own baptism, right? After they had come to faith. And so they did not have their children baptized early on. They wanted them to get to that point where they wanted to be baptized, which is okay. And so I prepared their son for baptism when he was, 13, something like that. But, there is that kind of thing with confirmation too. I don't have a problem with baptizing infants as long as you're going to raise them to know and love Jesus, right? If you're not going to do that, don't baptize them For God's sake, and for their sake, right? Don't do that. So, anyway, age of accountability, in our society, right, technically it's 18-ish, right? You can't drink until you're 21, so we're mixed up on the age of accountability. But I figure before you get the disruption of going away from home to college, right, perhaps we should at least broach the question. So that's why I do that. That's why I kind of spend high school trying to prepare people for that and then ask them at the end. You ready to follow up yet?
I'll say that.
Why?
I have a question.
Absolutely.
It has nothing to do with it. During Lent, we all take on the responsibility of, or I should say, of not eating meat on a Friday or whenever. Where did that tradition, where and when did it begin?
Right.
And why?
Okay. I can't pinpoint it, but I can give you broad strokes. The early church fasted, right? They practiced the discipline of fasting at various times. And the custom grew up that the 40 days or 50 days or, couple of weeks, some time before Easter was to be a corporate fast time, right? A season of fasting and penitence. And then as things went along in the Dark Ages of the medieval period, right? Well, you can't ask everybody to fast completely for 40 days, and they kind of set it at 40 days because they were doing catechisms, right? They were teaching during that time, and so they lengthened it a little bit or whatever. And then, so instead of just an all-out fast, they said, well, okay, it should be a season of fasting. What do we not eat when we're not celebrating? Well, meat. Meat is expensive, right? Meat is what you eat when you're celebrating, right? When you're feasting. There's that passage from Isaiah that we read during funeral services sometimes. The Lord has set on this mountain a feast of fat things, right? It's the meat with the fat in it is the good stuff, right? And it is. I mean, we know that. Right? It tastes better. And actually, some of that is good for you up to a point. But so because of that, they said, okay, during Lent, we're going to fast from meat, right? Like flesh meat. So you can still have, fish or something. And that's where the fish on Fridays thing comes about, right?
Why only Friday?
Well, okay, so that was Lent. And then another discipline that grew up very early on was fasting on Fridays in remembrance of the Passion. Not just in Lent. Okay? So you've got this fasting on Fridays thing, you've got this fasting during Lent thing. And they kind of go together so that when you boil it down, when people aren't really trying to keep the whole discipline, but they kind of are still, doing it because mom's nagging them or whatever. Well, I don't eat meat on Fridays during Lent, right? So that's how that kind of grows.
But then we have the meatless the meatless period on Friday.
Right, and we sort of keep that tradition together, right? On our Friday night suppers, right? Since we know some people may be keeping the tradition of fasting on Friday, particularly during Lent, when we add that devotion on Friday night in Lent and have supper together, we make sure that it doesn't have meat.
But then I was thinking,
right?
why can't we have fish on Friday instead of meatless? Because Friday, I mean, we already decided.
Yeah. So here's the secret. You can. If you want to fix fish for a meatless supper, you can do that.
Oh, okay.
So
here we just continue the tradition of meatless.
Just completely meatless.
Like,
right.
You can have fish or seafood, so why do we always
traditionally fish particularly is not considered. It is a source of protein, not meat.
In the
Right.
Orthodox Church, so you can't have fish.
Yeah. So. Well, and they extend it to like almost any form of protein, right? Except beans. So you can't have eggs or milk or meat, right? So if Gabrielle were here, she would probably try and defend that, but that's okay.
You know, my difference, and I'm amazing, very deeply religious Catholics, and really. And they were sent, it's not the US or Camp it's fantastic, they were sent to the middle of South America by the government. He was in the wilderness. What is that organization of the government?
The Peace Corps?
Peace Corps. And so, what was a treat was fish.
Yeah.
Because it was inland. And
Right.
only meat was, so they did
Right.
the other way around.
They turned it around. And I get that. That works. Right? Yeah.
Interestingly enough, a little trivia here, the Roman Catholic Church declared beaver and capybara to be fish.
In the New World.
Because they mostly live their lives
In the water. That's right. The capybaras and the
Capybara and beaver are both acceptable for
right. So here's the thing. Any kind of discipline, right? If where you're going is just trying to push the line as far as you can, then I'm not sure how much good it's doing. Right? But it's a good reminder. Right. That's right. So it's a good reminder. And I will say, in the seasons of Christmas and Easter, it is verboten to fast on Fridays even. Okay? So, I mean, eat what you want, but that's the point, right? Don't fast on the Fridays in those seasons because they're feast seasons. Festal. And Sundays are always feast days.
That's why I had
The Lord's Day. That's right. That's why Allison and I can have apple fritters on Sunday morning.
If can't get married during Lent.
I won't do a wedding on Lent.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we were
There's
plenty of people are married.
yeah.
They flat out refused.
They just won't do it, and I won't either.
Because my wife actually wanted to have the same anniversary as her parents, and
Yeah.
I guess Easter was early that year,
Right.
and so it was like March the 30th or something.
Oops. Yeah, Father.
It just came into my head. Why
Yeah.
do vegetarians give up?
Most. Can we say that most vegetarians are not Christians? I guess we can't say that.
No, you definitely cannot say that. That is ridiculous.
I knew I was. I was pushing buttons.
If you actually did the statistics, you were probably right.
But I know there are very devout Christians.
Gary fasts so strictly. I don't eat a lot of meat right now during Lent anyway, so I'm giving up sugar.
Yeah. You can always
Or you
have
give up alcohol.
plant stuff.
Yeah.
So the point is to fast, right? So sugar, right? Give
Or
up
alcohol.
sweets, give up alcohol, give up meat if meat is the thing. Meat is a very thousands of years old kind of fasting thing to give up, and so that's kind of a common. Yeah.
But you have to say, I think, in this, that if your favorite food is fish, then that's not a fast.
Yeah, I mean, so I had a friend in seminary whose brother was like a big businessman in New York, Italian Catholics, and she talked about how every Good Friday he would throw this big dinner party with lobster and shrimp and and it didn't have any meat, right? That was the point. He's like,
Okay,
that's not right. So
you said fish is protein, but why is fish not considered meat?
because I don't know, it's not a red meat. It's not beef or.
Doesn't have legs.
I think the cold-bloodedness might also.
The cold-bloodedness, maybe. Yeah, you're not. Yeah.
No, I mean, because
I haven't done a study on that.
Because I mean, so it's like chicken.
Yes.
It's considered meat.
Well, that's true, and it's not a red meat, but it still has legs. It's still warm-blooded. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't done a big study on this. But I mean, for the poor, right? For the poor in Europe, fowl would have been their normal source of protein, right? Fowl and eggs and milk, maybe. So, the deer all belong to the king, right? In England, so you can't go hunt the deer, and that's the whole. That's kind of the big deal there, right? So, anyway.
Inside, there's other.
That's right. They have sheep and that sort of thing.
Antelope in there too.
I don't know of any antelopes that originated in England.
Imported and they bred in.
Well, maybe, I don't know. And anyway, that's the idea of discipline during Lent and the Friday thing.
Right, so if we do a Friday dinner here and we decide to bring seafood, that's fine.
That's okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering why.
As far as I'm concerned, that's fine. It's we're keeping that traditional, fast on Friday, to remind ourselves. It's just a reminder that it's Lent and it's Friday, and we should be remembering the Passion and So yeah, I mean, self-denial, right? I mean, it's a spiritual discipline, right? If what you're doing is not a spiritual discipline and just custom, well, the custom may still be valuable just to remind you that there is a discipline here, right? But you're not really doing the discipline.
The founding fathers, that was the tradition,
Right.
wasn't it?
Right. Yeah. From very early on, it was a fast period. So that's all. Any other questions? So what kind of trouble can I get into in the next 15 minutes?
Walk out. No, do the back, get my back is hurting.
Okay.
Walk.
No problem.
I went to the Perry Museum with the grandchildren, and I always find it very difficult to look at the dinosaurs and all, trying to relate it
To the Bible? Yeah. Well, okay, that's a big one. I can do that though. I mean, the question is, when scientists, well, we're not really talking about scientists per se, right? we're talking about people who either wittingly or unwittingly, right? Some of this is unconscious, some of it is conscious. People who use science as a new worldview to displace religious views, right? So we all have to answer certain questions about reality, right?
But a lot of the scientists are very religious.
Oh yes, that's true. That's true. And that's why I said we're not talking about just scientists per se, right? Real scientists often realize that what they are talking about in science is really a different kind of knowing than what we're getting from the Bible. Okay?
I see that.
So, and lots of real scientists get that because they're really doing science and they see the limitations of science, right? Science is a very specific thing. It is a method of obtaining truth, right? And that's great. We have learned a lot. We have figured out a lot of how God's creation works through that method. But that method doesn't really work on anything that is not observable. Right? You have to set up the experiment, you have to observe it, right? You could even make a case for doing, psychological experiments and calling that science, right? You can set up an experiment, you can posit a hypothesis, you can test it, right? You can. It's harder, right, when you have, when the subjects are so complex as human beings. But, there's an argument to make there. But you certainly can't make any really scientific arguments about anything that you can't set up an experiment to disprove. Right? Now, you can use science, you can use what we know from science to infer some things. But now you've gone beyond science. Right? You're no longer using the scientific method. You're doing something different now. Okay?
Can you give an example of a scientific thing like that you think is past the point of observation?
Absolutely.
And there was some, the animals went in one by one, there's one more river to cross, the elephant chewing a carrot.
Yeah, well, that's a children's song, right?
But they never mention of two dinosaurs.
Well, right, but that's, so here's the thing. We have to read the Bible for what it says, right? Not what it doesn't say. Okay? So, well, and it says, and every other animal.
And every other animal.
Right. So certainly not all of them are named, right? So cats aren't named, for example. Right?
The animals from the Western Hemisphere get on the ark. Come on.
How did the animals from the Western Hemisphere?
We don't have to talk about dinosaurs. We can just talk about geography.
Yeah, if you think of geography as static, that's true. But of course, if geography is dynamic, which we know it is, because of the tectonics, over long periods of time, it's dynamic, right? So when we read the Bible and it says, on the first day, right, God formed the heavens and the earth. How do we read that? How do we do that, right? We have to read it for what it actually says, not something different. We can't impose our ideas of what these words must mean onto the text and then argue that the text is wrong when we haven't asked of the text what is it actually saying, right? So, it turns out that it's very easy to deal with that problem. The Hebrew word for day does not merely mean a 24-hour period. It means all kinds of things, right? Like most words, right? So, so if you look at that, and if you look at the whole first chapter of Genesis, I mean, since we're talking about dinosaurs and stuff, right? If you take the whole first chapter of Genesis and you say, okay, what is this saying to me? Well, it's not giving you a scientific explanation of...
It's not a how-to book.
Exactly.
It's not a science book.
It's not a science book. It's not, strictly speaking, as far as, in the terms that we would use, it's not even really a history book. Right? I mean, I would take it more or less historical, right, without any other evidence, but it's not history like we would write it, right? And it's certainly not scientific, right? So if you draw the picture, like if you go through the first chapter of Genesis and draw the picture of what is being described, right? What you get is a flat earth with a dome over it and the various things inside. Well, that's what, if I were Moses standing on the face of the earth looking around, that's what I would see. Right? So those are the terms in which God communicates. Because those are the terms in which he can understand. Right? Which people up until, the 1600 could understand. Yeah.
So related, when the Catholic Church is getting on the astronomers.
Yes.
For
yes.
using science.
Yeah.
Right. That is challenging the beliefs of the church.
Right.
Eventually, the church redefined their theology to match the observable universe.
Okay. So
right?
yes.
So now that we can observe a lot more about the universe, how much should that model continue to be in how we view?
No, I understand, because
because
if we can just change it whenever based on science, then why are we even using it?
Well, not
right?
based on science, but based on
observation.
And
right.
So
what happened there is the church was so powerful and understood itself as the repository of learning and knowledge.
Okay.
Right? Because it was during the Middle Ages. Right? And they started making claims that were not strictly biblical. Right?
Sure.
So they started talking about the music of the spheres, which was, right, that sort of thing. And the hierarchy of the heavens, which they had not observed, really. They had looked up, but that was it, right? And the Bible doesn't say anything about those things, right? But they had gotten into the habit of being the people who were allowed to tell you what was true and what was not. And so they made some claims that they shouldn't have made, right? They didn't understand what they didn't know. And this is why I'm a big advocate for knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
Right? So and that's why they could change that theology, because that theology wasn't really based on the Bible. Right? It was based on other stuff that they had picked up along the way that was, they thought was consonant with the Bible, like it fit in with the Bible, and so they just took it on wholesale.
My understanding is that the Roman Catholic Church has fully embraced the idea of the Big Bang.
Yeah. Well, so this is really funny, right? Because this is exactly the same thing as before, right? So what I would say is, interesting that that's what the scientists are thinking perhaps happened at the moment of creation, shall we say, is, this infinite power kind of cast out matter, right? I mean, I'm sure I'm way dumbing it down because I'm not a physicist, right? But that's kind of the idea. And I sit here as a theologian and go, shocker, right?
Well, I mean,
But I'm not married to that theory. Right? If they come back next year and say, no, we've disproved the Big Bang, now the Roman Church is going to have to say, oh, sorry again, right? I don't have to do that because I didn't say the Big Bang was true. I just said, well, that could make sense, right?
But there are a lot of people that say, though, that cannot make sense, right? There are
Like what?
That if you're not literally believing these accounts, that there is a shaky foundation for the truth of who God is and who Jesus is, right? There are people who, like, recently in my book club, which is filled with a lot of my mother-in-law's friends from church.
Okay.
We read a book.
Your mother-in-law's friends from church who are
Young Earth Creation Protestants.
Okay.
So,
got it. Yes. That's for the people at home listening.
So the book was written by a scientist who is a woman. She studies plants.
Right.
And in the book, she talks about evolution of plants, right?
Right.
And some of the members of the book club were saying, oh, she's evolution, she's coming at science from her preconceived faith of evolution.
Right.
And, shifting her science to meet this worldview.
Right.
And even some of the other, there are plenty of Christians in this group.
Right.
And some of the other ones were also like, well, you're doing the same thing,
You're doing the
right?
same
You
thing.
are also taking what you observe and filtering it through your worldview.
Right.
The thing that you are accusing her
Well,
of,
and we all do
you are
that.
doing
Like,
that
there's no way to
also.
escape that. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And there is no way to escape that. We want to do our best to avoid that as much as we can.
But for some
right?
people saying that the creation account is not literal, that the Big Bang didn't happen, or that evolution or dinosaurs or whatever is not biblically compatible, is like a dangerous idea, right? Like, if this is not true, then these other things could also not be true.
So if we're going to be, it is both faithful and highly scientific to have a very healthy skepticism, right, about all truth claims, okay, particularly when there are winners and losers, okay, and the high stakes poker game that is academic science, right, there are real winners and losers. The high stakes poker game that was, the medieval Catholic Church, there were definitely winners and losers, right? So this is, in some sense, there are probably always winners and losers. But the point is, right, to build from what we know rather than to try and tear down what we don't want to believe. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there are plenty of scientists, serious scientists, who are faithful believers of one sort or another, right? There is no contradiction between science and religion. It is only a contradiction if you have made science your religion. And then there is very definitely a conflict, right? So if, and we can look at the Bible and say, well, okay, this made sense to people, but based on what we do know, this is what it must mean, right? But very carefully making sure that what we think we know, we actually know. Because there's lots of fraudulent data, right? All over the place.
How do you know that?
There's lots of noise. Well, I've read Darwin on Trial, for one thing, right? I mean, that's, just one example. But I'm not saying it's just Darwinists who are doing this, right? I'm just saying it's hard to know, right, if you're not the expert. It's like going on the internet to try and figure out how to do something, right? Have you ever done that? Okay. So lots of us have done that. I used to explain brewing to people who were newbies, right? I was working in the shop, And I had to explain to them often, the internet is like the information Wild West, right? There's absolutely no governance on what people can and can't say and will and won't say. And so just because it's out there on the interwebs doesn't mean it's true, right? Well, we need to take that same kind of questioning attitude even to academic science, right? And say, okay, how do we know this, right? Okay, and we definitely need to take it to science as filtered through the media to us, right? Because those people are not scientists, right? And so they are trying to give us a sense of what scientists are saying, and that affects what we think is our worldview and what we think is true, without it being quite what the scientists really said, right? So we need to be very careful. There is evidence that is falsified. There are pronouncements and interpretations made of that evidence which are more or less feasible, right? Depending a lot on people's original worldview, on their political stance, on their economic motivations, right? All that stuff. So we can say that about the church in certain circumstances, so we need to be careful there. And we can say that about the certain kinds of scientific claims. So, there you go. It's not just that science came along and said, oh, you were wrong all along, so you need to change everything you believe. Well, no, we're not going to change everything we believe. You've pointed out some things to us here that we need to take account of, right? And go, okay, well, I am an agnostic when it comes to Darwinism, right? Definitely there is such a thing as micro, right? Well, natural selection. That's definitely a thing, right? That's a scientific observation. But whether you can apply that scientific observation to things that you have not observed and claim as a fact that one species changed so much it became a completely different species, and that something without eyes actually developed eyes over a long period of time by the process of natural selection. That seems to me to be highly unscientific. So that, I think, is a faith claim. Could it have happened? Well, God is God. He's in charge. I'm not. Maybe that's how he kind of did it all. Right? Okay.
A little DNA tweak here.
A little DNA tweak here and there. I mean, God could have done that. But, right. Well, and they had to wait until they produced offspring with a mutation, right? And there is such a thing as irreducible complexity, right? The eye is so complex. Just the human eye, or just any eye.
But there are eyes that are not as good as our eyes, right? There are less developed eyes.
Well, there are less developed eyes, but any eye is so many bits of data, right, as a design, that even if evolution, the evolutionary, track, even if that's true, it's still miraculous that God must have done it, right? So it still puts you back into that question.
The analogy I've heard and I always like is the odds of human beings spontaneously evolving,
right,
is roughly that of a tornado blowing through a junkyard and creating 747.
Right. I mean, and this is actually scientific. Okay, there is a branch of mathematics called information science, and that does exactly those kinds of calculations. Right. Given a thing, how much information is embodied in this thing, right? This table, like you'd have to measure every single, right? Every single dimension. You'd have to take account of all the angles of the supports. Then you have to take account of the materials involved, of which there are many, right? There's some particle board and some like plastic, different kinds of plastic, and some steel, stainless steel, I think, but maybe I'm wrong, right? There is so much information just in this table that if you are walking through the woods and find a table, you will infer, quite rightly, oh, somebody's been here and left a table. Not, oh, look, this is a new kind of plant. Right? Because it is clearly an artifact. So are we. We are clearly artifacts of someone, right? Someone designed us. That theory is called intelligent design. And don't believe everyone who calls themselves an intelligent design theorist. Because what I just described to you is the idea of intelligent design, not the young earth creation stuff. Okay? That does nothing about who God is. It only says there is someone who created all of this, because it couldn't have come from just nothing.
You're talking about, I'm thinking about Darwin. Darwin, Darwin. Mm-hmm. And the same premise. He was an intelligent. He was
a very smart guy, and he was a good scientist.
Yes.
He made true observations, scientific observations, and then he tried to apply those observations to things that were not scientific, and they are not scientific because he could not observe them.
Yes.
Okay? Now, I don't have a problem with doing that as long as we admit what we're doing. Right? But that's not science anymore. It's a theory. Right? And we can work at that theory, right? We can, work scientifically on that. I have no problem with that. But the high stakes come when you say, aha, we have a theory that now allows us to jettison the whole idea of God. Yay! Right? And that is what happened very early on. Darwin didn't popularize his own ideas. Huxley did.
Yes.
He got the nickname Darwin's Bulldog. I see the time. I'm going. But Huxley was very clear and explicit. He said, I believe this. I'm thankful to Darwin for giving me this, because now I don't have to believe in God. And because I don't have to believe in God, now I can do whatever I want. That is actually what Huxley said. So, sorry, I'm done now.